They tried to silence us, to keep us in the dark, but we are the storm, and we will not be.
The school gymnasium held 300 people that Tuesday evening, and every last one of them had stopped breathing. Not literally, of course, but the air had gone thick with the kind of collective tension that makes throats tighten and palms sweat. Folding chairs scraped against scuffed hardwood floors as parents, teachers, and long-time residents of the Belhaven district shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The basketball hoops had been cranked up to the ceiling. A projection screen dominated the stage where, just last month, sixth graders had performed a wobbly production of The Wizard of Oz. Tonight, a different kind of performance was underway. When a billionaire CEO came to shut down her neighborhood school, everyone went silent, except one woman who laughed. Have you ever heard something so out of touch, so polished and empty that you couldn't help but laugh, even though you knew you'd pay for it? This wasn't just about Lincoln Elementary School. This was about an entire neighborhood being reduced to a parcel on a zoning map. A community of corner stores and weekend barbecues, and old women who still hung laundry on fire escapes, being rebranded as an opportunity zone. Stay with me, because what this billionaire did after being laughed at is the part almost nobody expects. Corvan Ives stood at center stage like a man who had never encountered a room he couldn't own. 53 years old, silver threading through dark hair that was too perfectly disheveled to be accidental, wearing a blazer that cost more than most attendees' monthly rent. Behind him, the projector threw glowing renderings onto the screen. Sleek towers of glass and steel, tree-lined plazas populated by models clutching shopping bags, a rooftop garden where happy people practiced yoga at sunrise. The development was called Belhaven Commons. The irony was not lost on anyone who actually lived in Belhaven. The current structure, Corvan was saying, his voice smooth as aged whiskey, represents an underutilized asset in a community that deserves revitalization. Our phased approach ensures minimal disruption while maximizing the potential of this space for future generations. Selene Marquez sat 7 rows back near the aisle. Her paint-streaked sneakers were tucked beneath her chair, and her fingers still bore traces of the burnt sienna she had been working with that afternoon. At 34, she carried herself with the particular exhaustion of someone who had been fighting small battles for so long that she had forgotten what rest felt like. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her eyes tracked Corvan's every gesture with the focus of someone cataloging evidence. She hadn't planned to laugh. The sound escaped before she could catch it, a short, involuntary bark of laughter that sliced through the gymnasium's reverent silence like a match struck in darkness. 300 heads turned. Corvan Ives paused mid-sentence. His polished composure flickered for just a fraction of a second, a muscle twitching near his jaw, a subtle hardening around his eyes. He recovered quickly, but the pause had been long enough to matter. "I'm sorry," he said, not sounding sorry at all. His gaze swept the crowd until it locked onto the source of the interruption. Did someone have a comment? The tension in the room could have cracked bones. Selene felt her face flush, felt the weight of every stare pressing against her skin. Her mother, seated beside her, gripped her forearm in warning. "Don't," that grip said. "Not here. Not now." But Corvan was already gesturing toward the microphone stand at the front of the audience section. "Please," he said, and there was something almost amused in his tone. "If you have concerns, we absolutely want to hear them. This is, after all, a community dialogue." Community dialogue. As if this gymnasium full of people whose lives would be upended by his phased approach had any real power here. Selene stood. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. She could feel her heart hammering against her ribs as she made her way to the aisle, as she walked toward the microphone with legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The crowd parted for her without a word. When she reached the microphone, she looked up at the stage where Corvan waited with that patient, patronizing smile. "You keep using the word disruption," Selene said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Like it's an inconvenience, a temporary problem." She paused, and when she spoke again, her words carried to every corner of that gymnasium. "You're standing in the disruption, Mr. Ives. We're the disruption. And you still don't see us. If you appreciate stories that make you question what you would do in impossible situations where the right choice is not always clear, Take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I explore these moral crossroads every week, and I would love to have you along for the journey. Now tell me in the comments, what would you have done? Would you have laughed? Would you have stood up? Or would you have stayed silent, knowing the cost of speaking out? The gymnasium hung suspended in that moment, Celine at the microphone, Corvan on the stage, 300 witnesses holding their breath. But to understand why this laugh mattered, why this woman's defiance would set into motion a chain of events that no one in that room could have predicted, you have to see what was already fracturing long before the billionaire ever showed up. You have to go back to the neighborhood itself, and the cracks that had been spreading for years. Lincoln Elementary School wore its age like a tired grandmother who refused to sit down. The hallways stretched long and dim, fluorescent tubes flickering in that uncertain rhythm that maintenance had stopped fixing months ago. Classroom doors stood propped open with doorstops made from old textbooks. Budget cuts had claimed the functional ones years back. Half the rooms sat empty now, desks pushed against walls and covered with plastic sheeting, as if the school itself was being prepared for a wake nobody had officially announced. Ceiling tiles sagged in the corners where water damage had crept in during last winter's storms. Brown stains spread across them like coffee rings on forgotten paperwork. The library, once the proud heart of the building, held shelves that grew emptier each semester as damaged books were removed and never replaced. Dust motes drifted through slanted afternoon light, settling on encyclopedias that still referenced countries that no longer existed. But it was the mural that broke something in those who remembered. Painted 30 years ago by students and parents working weekend after weekend, it stretched across the main corridor's eastern wall, children holding hands around a painted globe, a rainbow arching overhead. The words "Together we rise" scripted in bright yellow. Now the paint peeled at the edges. Someone had scratched initials into the corner. A water stain had claimed a portion of the lower section. Outside, the row announced itself without apology. Porches leaned at angles that suggested stubbornness rather than collapse, still standing, still occupied, still holding families who had nowhere else to go and no intention of leaving. Corner stores advertised specials on hand-painted signs, their awnings faded by decades of summer sun. Chain-link fences bordered narrow yards where tomato plants grew in recycled buckets and children's bicycles rusted against railings. The city's official brochures called this neighborhood the North River Corridor, complete with glossy photographs carefully angled to exclude the boarded windows and overflowing dumpsters. Nobody who lived here used that name. They called it the Row. Always had, always would. 3 generations of Belhaven children had passed through Lincoln Elementary's front doors, and the building remembered every single one of them. It remembered the hot meals served during the recession of the early 90s, when the cafeteria became an unofficial food bank, and teachers pretended not to notice parents slipping extra bread rolls into their pockets. It remembered the winter coat drives that transformed the gymnasium into mountains of donated parkas and mittens, children trying on sizes while their mothers calculated how to make one coat stretch between siblings. It remembered first books pressed into small hands, well-worn copies with previous owners' names penciled inside the covers. It remembered the moment when letters became words and words became sentences, and sentences became the sudden, electric realization that the whole world could fit inside pages. For the Row, Lincoln Elementary was not just a school, it was a sanctuary. Grandparents who had learned their multiplication tables in these classrooms now walked grandchildren through the same front doors, pointing out the water. Fountain that still ran too cold, the gymnasium where they had their first dance, the oak tree in the courtyard that had been half its current size decades ago. Some of those grandparents still carried crayon drawings in their wallets, stick figures and wobbly houses and suns with radiating lines, preserved behind plastic like sacred documents. The paper had yellowed, the crayon had faded, but the memory of the child who made it, tongue pressed between teeth in concentration, remained perfectly vivid. Now a closure notice hung on the front door. White paper, black text, the district's official seal in the corner. The language was bureaucratic and bloodless: consolidation, resource optimization, transition support services. Words designed to make the death of something precious sound like efficient paperwork. The families who read that notice understood the translation. You don't matter enough to save. Celine Marquez had been born 3 blocks from Lincoln Elementary, in the upstairs apartment of a narrow row house that her grandmother had rented since 1962. The building still stood, though the landlord had stopped responding to maintenance requests somewhere around 2015. The radiators clanked like prisoners rattling bars. The hot water ran for exactly 7 minutes before turning glacial. But the windows faced east, which meant Celine had grown up watching the sun rise over the row, light spilling across rooftops and fire escapes like a daily promise that the world could still be beautiful. Her grandmother, Rosa, had scrubbed Lincoln Elementary's floors for 23 years. Night shifts, calloused hands, the sharp smell of industrial cleaning solution that never quite washed out of her clothes. Rosa had known every corner of that building, which bathroom door stuck, which stairwell step creaked, which classroom's heater rattled loud enough to wake sleeping teachers during late-night grading sessions. "This school is built from our hands," Rosa used to say, rubbing those worn palms together as if she could still feel the mop handle's weight. "The people with money, they see a building. We see our fingerprints." Celine's mother, Marisol, had run the sewing club that operated out of room 14 every Thursday afternoon, teaching teenage girls to hem their own skirts, showing young mothers how to patch worn jeans so they could last another season, transforming donated fabric into Halloween costumes and celebration decorations, and the soft cotton receiving blankets that welcomed new babies into the Rose extended family. And Celine herself had learned to read in room 12. Mrs. Patterson, grey-haired and patient, had guided her finger beneath the words until the letters suddenly clicked into meaning. That moment stayed with Celine more vividly than her first kiss, more clearly than her high school graduation. The sudden understanding that symbols on paper could become stories, could become worlds, could become escape routes from circumstances that felt inescapable. She still remembered what Mrs. Patterson had said to the class that year, words that had burrowed into Celine's chest and never left. "We're not just learning words, we're learning how not to disappear." Now Celine was 34, with paint-stained sneakers and a soft denim jacket worn thin at the elbows. She was not glamorous. She did not own a single piece of clothing without some evidence of her work. But she was present, fiercely, stubbornly, immovably present, and she had no intention of watching her neighborhood disappear. The closure notice appeared on a Monday. By Wednesday, Solène had organized the first tutoring session in the cafeteria. She did not ask permission, did not file paperwork, simply showed up at 3 o'clock with a folding table, a stack of donated workbooks, and a hand-painted sign that read, "Free homework help. All ages. No questions asked." The first afternoon, only 4 children came. Shy, uncertain, accompanied by mothers who lingered near the doors as if expecting to be ejected at any moment. By the second week, the number had grown to 15. By the end of the month, Celine was coordinating a rotating schedule of volunteer tutors, retired teachers, college students earning community service credits, an accountant named Gerald who had secretly always wanted to teach long division. The cafeteria became something it had never been before, a statement. We are still here. We are still teaching. We are not going quietly. Saturdays brought the repair crews. Mr. DeLaro, who had been an electrician for 37 years before his knees gave out, arrived each weekend with a toolbox older than most of the volunteers. He replaced the flickering fluorescents one by one, working slowly because rushing hurt, but working nonetheless. "Light matters," he would say, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Can't learn in the dark." The mechanic from the auto shop on Hadley Street spent 6 consecutive Saturdays sealing the front steps with waterproof concrete patching. His hands were permanently stained with motor oil, but he learned a new skill just to keep children from tripping on crumbling edges. The elderly Kowalski sisters, Anna and Irene, brought cleaning supplies and attacked the grime-covered windows with a ferocity that suggested personal grudges against dirt itself. Nobody paid them. Nobody asked them to come. They simply showed up, weekend after weekend, because the school belonged to them and they refused to watch it decay. And every few weeks, the potluck meetings happened. Folding tables appeared in the gymnasium, covered with mismatched cloths and foil pans of food brought by families who had little to spare, but shared anyway. Kids ran between adult legs while parents clustered around poster boards covered with ideas, petition signatures, media contacts, city council meeting schedules. Celine stood at the center of it all, exhausted and determined, her voice carrying over the chaos. "We'll show them," she would say. "Not maybe, not hopefully, not if everything goes right. We'll show them." Determination had become Celine's default expression, worn so constantly that she had forgotten what her face looked like relaxed. The exhaustion lived in her bones now, in the way she sat down too hard on chairs, in the extra seconds it took her to stand back up, in the dark circles under her eyes that no amount of sleep seemed to touch. She ran on coffee and stubbornness, and the particular kind of anger that does not explode, but instead sharpens itself into something more dangerous, purpose. She was angry at the school board members who voted for closure without ever visiting a classroom, angry at the city council representatives who spoke about difficult decisions while their own children attended private academies with rock-climbing walls and organic lunch menus, angry at the developers who looked at her neighborhood and saw not homes but land values, not families but obstacles. But mostly, Celine was angry at the message that closure sent to every child who had ever walked through Lincoln Elementary's doors. You don't matter. Your education doesn't matter. Your future doesn't matter. Your parents' sacrifices don't matter. Pack up your backpacks and go somewhere else, because this building is worth more as rubble than as a school. That message was a kind of violence, Celine believed. Not the obvious kind that left bruises and made headlines. The quieter kind. The kind that taught children early that their neighborhood was disposable, that their community was temporary, that their roots could be ripped up whenever someone with more money needed the soil. She had watched too many kids internalize that lesson already, had seen it in the slumped shoulders of teenagers who had stopped believing that college was possible, had heard it in the bitter laughter of parents who mocked their own dreams as naive. No more. Not while she could still stand. Not while she could still fight. Not while there was breath in her body and fight in her fists. For 6 months, Celine and the Rao fought their invisible war. They collected signatures, 3,000 names on a petition that the school board accepted with polite smiles and filed somewhere that paperwork goes to be forgotten. They attended city council meetings, sitting through hours of procedural tedium for 3 minutes of public comment time, their voices entering the record but never the consideration. They wrote letters to newspapers. They created social media accounts that gained a few hundred followers and then stalled. The machine of municipal government absorbed their resistance like water into sand. Nothing changed. Nothing shifted. The closure date remained fixed on the calendar, approaching with the steady patience of something that knew it would win eventually. Celine had started to wonder if visibility was even possible. If anyone beyond the Rose borders cared whether Lincoln Elementary lived or died. And just when their fight was starting to look invisible to the people in charge, when exhaustion was beginning to feel permanent and hope was beginning to feel foolish, a new name appeared on the papers filed with the city planning office. Ives Development Corporation, a name with enough money to change almost anything, or destroy it faster. The Billionaire was coming to Bellhaven, and everything was about to accelerate in ways that no potluck meeting could have prepared them for. Corvan Ives had built an empire from nothing, and he never let anyone forget it. The official biography, the one that appeared in Forbes profiles and TED Talk introductions, told the story of a boy from a factory town, son of a laid-off steelworker and a school cafeteria cook. Scholarship to state college, first job in a warehouse, loading trucks for minimum wage. A logistics startup launched from a basement apartment with maxed-out credit cards and 4 hours of sleep per night. 20 years later, Ives Integrated owned the largest private transportation network in the northeastern United States. Trucks, warehouses, distribution centers, last-mile delivery services. His algorithms determined how packages moved from manufacturer to doorstep. His contracts with major retailers made him indispensable. His net worth, according to the most recent estimates, hovered somewhere around $4 billion. But logistics had become boring. The real money now, Corvan had decided, lay in what he called urban renewal infrastructure. Translation: buying undervalued land in neglected neighborhoods, demolishing whatever stood there, and replacing it with mixed-use developments that attracted young professionals with disposable income and expensive taste in coffee. He had already transformed 3 neighborhoods in Philadelphia, 2 in Baltimore, 1 in Newark. Bellhaven was next. And Lincoln Elementary School, along with the 12 surrounding blocks of residential properties, appeared on his planning documents as Parcel 7B. Not a school, not a neighborhood, not homes where families had lived for generations, just a parcel, a number, a line item on a spreadsheet calculating return on investment. The gymnasium had been transformed into something resembling civic duty. Metal folding chairs, arranged in tight rows, faced the small stage where the projector screen waited. Parents filled most of the seats, mothers with toddlers on laps, fathers still wearing work uniforms, elderly grandparents who had walked from nearby blocks because parking was impossible. Teachers lined the walls, arms crossed, expressions carefully neutral in the way that employees must be when their jobs depend on not causing trouble. Children too young for babysitters sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor near the back, coloring books open, crayons scattered in disorganized rainbows. Their occasional laughter punctured the tense adult silence like unexpected bells. Selene had arrived 2 hours early to set up. She ran the sign-in table near the entrance, checking names against the neighborhood directory she had assembled over months of door-to-door canvassing. Blue painter's tape marked pathways on the floor, arrows directing traffic, squares designating standing room areas, a rectangle outlining where the accessible seating would go for Mr. Hendricks and his wheelchair. Her hands moved automatically through the organizational tasks, while her mind calculated outcomes. 300 people confirmed, maybe 50 more walk-ins. Local news had sent 1 camera crew, not the main anchors, just a junior reporter and a bored-looking cameraman. The city council representative for their district had sent regrets via email, citing a scheduling conflict that everyone understood meant cowardice. No one from the school board had come, but the billionaire himself was scheduled to appear. That, at least, was something. Corvan Eves arrived 17 minutes late, which Selene suspected was intentional. He entered through the gymnasium's side door with an entourage of 4, 2 assistants clutching tablets, a communications director with a practiced smile, and a man in an expensive suit who never spoke but watched everything with the alertness of private security. The crowd's murmuring dropped to silence as heads turned toward the newcomers. Corvan himself had dressed for the occasion in what wealthy people considered relatable. Sleeves rolled to the forearms, revealing a watch that cost more than the gymnasium's annual maintenance budget. No tie. Top button undone. Hair styled to suggest he had simply run his fingers through it rather than spent 45 minutes with a personal groomer. He took the stage like a man accepting an award. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice warm and practiced. "I know your time is valuable, so I'll keep this straightforward." The projector hummed to life. The first slide appeared: Bellhaven Commons, a vision for tomorrow. Over the next 15 minutes, Corvan walked the audience through his plan. Glassy towers rose on the screen, their facades reflecting imaginary sunlight. Cafe tables dotted tree-lined plazas where stylishly dressed couples laughed over wine. Bike lanes curved gracefully past retail spaces. Rooftop gardens bloomed with vegetation that required professional maintenance. The language flowed like syrup, sweet and designed to coat everything it touched. The current structure represents an underutilized asset in a community that deserves better. Strategic capital deployment will catalyze economic activity throughout the corridor. Our mixed-use development model creates jobs while honoring the neighborhood's character. The transition ensures minimal disruption while maximizing long-term community benefit. Minimal disruption. Those words hung in the air like smoke. Selene's laugh escaped before her brain could intervene. It was not polite, was not quiet, was not the kind of sound that could be mistaken for a cough or explained away as something stuck in her throat. It was sharp and involuntary and utterly incredulous. The laugh of someone who had just heard the most absurd thing imaginable, delivered with complete seriousness. Minimal disruption. The phrase had broken something loose inside her chest. and the laugh had followed. Every head in the gymnasium swiveled in her direction. 300 pairs of eyes found her standing near the sign-in table, one hand still holding a stack of unclaimed name tags, the other pressed against her mouth as if trying to recapture the sound that had already filled the room. On stage, Corvan Ives stopped mid-sentence. His expression shifted through several phases in rapid succession: surprise, then confusion, then a flicker of irritation quickly suppressed behind professional composure. He scanned the crowd, searching for the source of the interruption, his eyes narrowing slightly when they locked onto Solène. For 3 seconds that felt like 30, nobody moved. The junior reporter near the back straightened, suddenly interested. The cameraman lifted his equipment from his shoulder, checking the battery indicator. "I'm sorry," Corvan said, his voice carefully modulated to convey patience rather than annoyance. "Did someone have a question?" Silence. Solène felt her face burning. Her mother's grip tightened on her forearm from the nearby seat. "Don't." That grip pleaded. "Not here." Not like this. But Corvan was already gesturing toward the microphone stand positioned in the center aisle. "Please," he said, and something in his smile suggested he was enjoying this more than he should. "We value community input. If you have concerns, we absolutely want to hear them." The challenge hung in the air. Solène had 2 choices. She could shake her head, mutter an apology, sink back into the crowd, and let the moment pass. Safe, forgettable, the smart play. Or she could walk to that microphone. Her sneakers squeaked against the hardwood as she pushed away from the sign-in table. The microphone felt cold in her hands. Solène looked up at Corvan on the stage, at his rolled sleeves and practiced smile and the glowing renderings of a neighborhood that existed only in his imagination. Behind her, 300 people waited. "You talk about minimal disruption," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "Like we're an inconvenience, a speed bump on the way to your investment returns." She paused, letting the words settle. "Do you know why I laughed, Mr. Ives? Because I've heard this speech before. Different billionaire, different project, same promises. And every time, the disruption you're minimizing is us. Our families, our children, our lives." The gymnasium had gone utterly silent. Even the children in the back had stopped coloring. 3 schools in this district have closed in the last 10 years. 3. The bus routes that connected our neighborhood to downtown were cut 5 years ago because someone decided they were underperforming. Half the buildings on my block have been left to rot by landlords waiting for property values to rise high enough to justify selling. Her voice grew stronger with each sentence. "And now you stand up there with your beautiful slides and your cafe, lights and your bike lanes, talking about underutilized assets. You want to know what this building actually is, Mr. Ives?" She turned slightly, gesturing at the gymnasium around them. The sagging ceiling tiles, the faded mural, the basketball hoops cranked up to make room for folding chairs. "This is the only safe place for half the kids in this zip code. This is where they get their first books, their first hot meals when the food stamps run out before the end of the month, their first experience of adults who believe they matter." She faced him again. "You're standing in the disruption, we're the disruption, and you still don't see us." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, somewhere in the middle rows, a single pair of hands began to clap. Hesitant at first, then another joined, then another. The applause spread like fire, catching, cautious, but real. Corvan waited for the applause to fade before responding. When he spoke, something in his voice had shifted. The polished smoothness remained, but beneath it, a crack had appeared, small, almost imperceptible, but present. "You're right," he said. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. "I don't live your life. I have numbers, not bus routes. Spreadsheets, not stories about where children learn to read." He paused, and Solène could see him choosing his next words carefully. "I don't have a good answer for what you've said. Not yet. But I'm telling you, I take it seriously." It was not enough. Solène knew it was not enough. But it was different from the pure corporate deflection she had expected, different from the dismissive smile and the pivot to the next slide. The meeting ended 20 minutes later, dissolving into the usual chaos of folding chairs and scattered papers. and people clustering into small groups to process what they had witnessed. The cameras left first. The junior reporter packed up without interviewing anyone, apparently deciding the story was not worth pursuing. The residents filtered out slowly, some stopping to squeeze Soline's shoulder or whisper encouragement. Her mother kissed her forehead and headed home with promises to save dinner. By 9 o'clock, the gymnasium was empty except for scattered trash, paper plates from the refreshment table, abandoned flyers, a child's forgotten crayon. Soline moved through the rows, collecting garbage into a plastic bag, her movements mechanical. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind the bone-deep exhaustion that always followed confrontation. She did not notice she was not alone until a shadow fell across her path. Corvan Ives stood near the faded mural, his entourage gone, his rolled sleeves somehow looking less calculated in the dim light. No security, no microphone. Just a billionaire and a woman with a trash bag, standing in a gymnasium that smelled like old sweat and dying hope. "I want to understand more," he said. "About what you said, about what this place means." Solène straightened, the plastic bag dangling from her fist. "I didn't invite you," she replied. "I interrupted you. There's a difference." Something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps, or the unfamiliar experience of being corrected. Fair enough. He took a step closer, hands shoved into his pockets in a gesture that might have been genuine uncertainty, or might have been another performance. "Then consider this, me asking. What would it take for you to believe I'm serious?" Solène studied him for a long moment. She had met men like him before, wealthy, charming, skilled at saying whatever words would purchase temporary compliance. She had watched them make promises and break them with the casual ease of someone who had never faced consequences. But something about tonight felt different. The crack in his armor, the way he had stayed after the cameras left, the fact that he was standing here now, asking. She made a decision. "Come Saturday morning," she said. 8 o'clock. We run volunteer repair shifts, fixing what the district won't fix. Bring your hands, not your brand. No cameras, no assistants, no press releases about community engagement. Corvan's eyebrows rose slightly. "You want me to do manual labor? I want to see if you're willing to work, not talk, not write checks. Work." She tied off the trash bag and slung it over her shoulder. "Show up or don't. But if you don't, we both know what your promises are worth." For a moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he nodded. Saturday, 8 o'clock. Solène turned toward the exit, pausing at the door. "We'll see," she said, and she left him standing alone beneath the faded mural, surrounded by the ghosts of children who had learned to read in rooms he wanted to demolish. If you were Solène, would you trust him? If you were Corvan, would you actually show up? Tell me in the comments what you think is going to happen on that Saturday morning, and tap that like button if you believe actions speak louder than words. Most people in that gymnasium expected Saturday to be just another broken promise, another wealthy man making commitments he had no intention of keeping, moving on to the next project while the row continued its slow decline. But sometimes, the real story starts when nobody is filming. And what happened on that Saturday morning would change everything. For Solène, for Corvan, and for a neighborhood that had almost forgotten how to hope. The dawn arrived grey and cool, mist clinging to the row's rooftops like reluctant ghosts. Solène stood on Lincoln Elementary's front steps at 7:30, her soft denim jacket zipped against the chill, a clipboard tucked under her arm. The volunteer sign-up sheet showed 18 names, the regulars who appeared every Saturday regardless of weather, exhaustion, or the creeping suspicion that their efforts might ultimately mean nothing. Mr. Delaro arrived first, his toolbox rattling as he climbed the steps with the careful deliberation of aging knees. Behind him came the Kowalski sisters, armed with buckets and rags and their usual fierce determination. "So," Anna Kowalski said, adjusting her cleaning gloves, "the billionaire. He's actually coming?" Solène shrugged. "He said he would." "They always say things." Irene's voice carried the particular skepticism of someone who had watched decades of promises dissolve into nothing. "Doesn't mean the things happen." The mechanic from Hadley Street pulled up in his rusted sedan, parking crookedly against the curb. $50 says he doesn't show. He called through the open window. "Any takers?" A few volunteers laughed. Others shook their heads with the resigned amusement of people who had stopped being surprised by disappointment. "Good thing we'd be here anyway," Mr. DeLaro said, already heading inside. "School doesn't fix itself waiting for rich men to keep their word." Selene checked her watch. 7:45. She did not say what she was thinking. That part of her hoped he would not come. That Corvin's staying away would confirm everything she believed about men like him. That his absence would be simpler than whatever complications his presence might bring. The mist continued to cling. The volunteers continued to arrive. And Selene continued to watch the street. At 8:03, a pickup truck turned onto the block. Not a limousine. Not a sleek black SUV with tinted windows. A dusty Ford F-150 that had clearly seen better decades, its paint faded to an indeterminate shade between blue and grey, a crack spidering across the lower corner of the windshield. The truck pulled to the curb with the uncertain hesitation of someone unfamiliar with parallel parking on narrow streets. Selene watched the driver's door open. Corvin Ives stepped out looking nothing like the man who had stood on the gymnasium stage 4 days earlier. Gone were the rolled sleeves and the calculated casualness. Instead, he wore faded jeans with genuine wear at the knees, a plain grey hoodie with a small hole near the hem, and work boots that showed actual scuff marks. He reached back into the truck and emerged with a cardboard tray holding a dozen paper coffee cups, steam rising from the small openings in their lids. The volunteers had stopped moving. 18 pairs of eyes tracked his approach up the walkway, their expressions ranging from suspicious to openly hostile to cautiously curious. Selene met him at the bottom of the steps. "You're late," she said. Corvin glanced at his watch. 3 minutes. In a neighborhood with no traffic at 8 in the morning, 3 minutes is a choice. She took the coffee tray from his hands, passing it to Anna Kowalski without breaking eye contact. "We started without you." Something flickered across his face, not offense exactly, more like the unfamiliar experience of being held to standards that his wealth could not soften. "Where do you need me?" he asked. Selene handed him a paint scraper. "Room 14, 3rd floor. The walls need prep work before we can prime. Try not to damage the plaster." She turned and walked inside without waiting to see if he followed. The morning unfolded in the rhythms of physical labor. Corvin hauled 5-gallon paint buckets up 3 flights of stairs, his expensive fitness regimen proving inadequate for the specific demands of carrying awkward weight through narrow stairwells. He scraped old paint from window frames with a tool he clearly had never held before, his technique improving slowly as the mechanic from Hadley Street offered gruff corrections from across the room. He taped edges with blue painter's tape and somehow managed to create bubbles that would ruin clean lines. He tried to patch a section of crumbling wall and mixed the compound too wet, creating a mess that Mr. DeLaro had to fix with patient resignation. He dropped a brush and splattered primer across the floor. He over-tightened a doorknob and stripped the screw. He stepped backward into a paint tray and left white footprints across 12 feet of hallway before anyone stopped him. But he kept asking, "How do you want this done?" Not commanding, not directing, not offering to write a check so someone else could handle the inconvenience. Just asking, with what appeared to be genuine uncertainty, how to do the work correctly. The volunteers noticed. Mr. DeLaro started explaining rather than just fixing. The mechanic showed him the proper way to load a brush. Even Irene Kowalski, whose distrust had been the most vocal, began offering tips on which sections needed extra attention. By noon, the side eyes had softened into something approaching grudging acceptance, not trust. Not yet. But the recognition that this man, whatever his motives, was willing to look foolish in exchange for being useful. Selene found Corvin standing motionless in room 14. He had stopped mid-task, paint scraper dangling forgotten in his hand, his attention fixed on the wall beside the window. She followed his gaze to what had captured him, a display of construction paper handprints, faded by years of sunlight but still visible. Tiny palms in red, blue, yellow, green. Names written beneath in careful teacher's handwriting. Small fingers pressed against color by children who had learned in this very room. The paper had curled at the edges. Some handprints had torn where tape had failed, but they remained, evidence of children who had pressed their small hands against color and left something behind. Corvan did not seem to notice Soline's approach. "I keep hearing my own words," he said quietly, still staring at the wall. "Underutilized asset. Minimal disruption. Strategic deployment." He shook his head slowly. "I stood up there talking about efficient use of space. And this is the space. These are the hands." Soline leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You want to know why you feel different looking at this than you felt looking at your spreadsheets?" He turned to face her, something unguarded in his expression. "Because you're looking at the hands," she said, "not the numbers. The hands." For a long moment, neither spoke. The afternoon light filtered through the dusty windows, catching the faded colors of small palms pressed against paper by children who had probably forgotten this room existed. They sat on overturned buckets in the hallway during the afternoon break, paper cups of cold coffee between them. "People think closing a school is just about the building," Soline said, picking at a dried paint spot on her jeans. "Move the kids somewhere else, problem solved. They don't understand what actually breaks." Corvan waited, listening. When Lincoln closes, the corner store on Maple loses half its morning traffic, parents buying snacks on the walk to school. Mrs. Park closes within 6 months, guaranteed. The rec center across the street loses its after-school partnership. Without that, kids have nowhere safe between 3 and 6. Crime goes up. Property values go down. More families leave. She looked at him directly. One school closing tears through everything connected to it. The jobs, the safety net, the identity of the whole neighborhood. It's not a building, it's a web. Cut one strand, the whole thing starts falling apart. "Why you?" Corvan asked. "Why not someone else fighting this?" Soline's laugh held no humor. "Who else? The city council members who don't return calls? The school board that approved the closure? The developers who see dollar signs where we see home?" She stood, brushing dust from her jacket. "I can't fix the whole system, I know that. But I can fight for this school, this neighborhood, these people." She paused. "Someone has to." Corvan remained seated, turning his empty cup in his hands. "Could I come back?" he asked. "Next Saturday." Soline studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you still see parcel 7 billions when you look around, or whether you're starting to see what's actually here." She walked away before he could answer. The afternoon wound down in the particular exhaustion of productive labor. Volunteers packed up tools and sealed paint cans. Mr. DeLaro inspected the day's work with the critical eye of a professional, nodding slowly at walls that looked marginally better than they had that morning. The Kowalski sisters departed with promises to return, their cleaning supplies loaded into a cart that squeaked with every rotation. Corvan lingered on the front steps, watching the neighborhood settle into early evening rhythms. Children emerged from nearby houses, their voices carrying across the street. A woman shook out a rug from a second-floor window. Someone's radio played music from an open doorway. The corner store's lights flickered on, casting yellow warmth onto the sidewalk. It looked nothing like his renderings. No glass towers, no cafe lights, no yoga practitioners on rooftop gardens. It looked like home. Someone else's home. A home he had planned to demolish. Soline appeared beside him, keys jangling. "You're still here." "Just looking." She followed his gaze down the block, seeing what he was seeing, or trying to understand what he saw. "Different view than the stage, isn't it?" Corvan nodded slowly. "Different than anything I expected." He descended the steps, paint still visible on his shoes, his hoodie streaked with primer that would never wash out completely. At the sidewalk, he turned back. "Next Saturday." Soline's expression remained neutral. "We'll see." But something in her voice had shifted, not warmth exactly, but perhaps the first small crack in the wall she maintained between herself and hope. He left that day with paint on his shoes and something heavier on his mind, the feeling that for years he might have been very successful and very wrong. The pickup truck disappeared around the corner, and Soline stood alone on the steps of a school that refused to die quietly. She did not know what Saturday would bring, did not know if his transformation was genuine or another performance designed to gain advantage. But she knew something had shifted in that gymnasium 4 days ago, and she knew something had shifted again today. Whether it would matter remained to be seen. He came back, not just the following Saturday, but the Monday after that, and the Wednesday, and every day that week until Selene stopped counting. Corvan rode the 6:15 bus from the transit hub on Riverside, the early route that carried night shift workers home and day shift workers to their grinding hours. He sat in the back, watching the city pass through smudged windows, vacant lots where buildings had been demolished and never replaced, boarded storefronts with faded for lease signs bleached by years of sun, bus stops without shelters, where people waited in rain that the city apparently believed they deserved. The route took 47 minutes to travel a distance his car could cover in 12. He sat quietly in the cafeteria during tutoring sessions, observing Selene work with a 9-year-old named Danny, who stumbled over words like enough and through, words that broke the rules he had just learned about letters and sounds. Selene never showed frustration, never rushed, just guided his finger beneath the syllables again and again, until the sounds began to click. "You're doing it," she would say. "You're reading," and the boy's face would light up like someone had handed him a gift he did not know he was allowed to want. Corvan walked door to door with Selene through the narrow row houses of the row, translating the clinical language of school district closure letters into something residents could actually understand. He watched her explain timelines and appeal processes to grandmothers who had never finished high school themselves, but who understood perfectly that their grandchildren were being written off. He listened more than he spoke, and slowly the neighborhood began to see him differently than they had seen the man on that gymnasium stage. The line that haunted him came from a father named Jerome Williams. They were standing on Jerome's porch, Selene explaining the timeline for the school board's final decision, when Jerome interrupted with a question that was not really a question. "They got all these metrics right, test scores, graduation rates, budget per pupil." Jerome's voice was tired in a way that suggested the exhaustion went deeper than sleep could fix. "But nobody measures the kid standing on a dark corner at 4 in the afternoon, because there's no place safe to go. Nobody counts that." Corvan opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. What could he say? That his spreadsheets tracked enrollment trends, but not the texture of fear in a mother's voice when she described the route her child walked home. That his projections calculated property values, but not the cost of a neighborhood losing its only gathering place. Jerome was not waiting for an answer anyway. He had already turned back inside, the screen door closing with a soft click that sounded like dismissal. That night, alone in his penthouse apartment with its floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking a city he had helped reshape, Corvan could not stop hearing the words. Nobody measures the kid on a dark corner. His spreadsheet suddenly felt very small. Corvan's first instinct was to fix things the way he always fixed things, with money and technology and impressive announcements. He arrived at the next community meeting with a presentation on his tablet, sleek graphics showing a state-of-the-art technology lab. Chromebooks for every student, coding curriculum designed by former tech company engineers, a partnership with a startup accelerator that would expose middle schoolers to entrepreneurial thinking. "We could position Lincoln Elementary as a STEM magnet," he explained, enthusiasm bleeding through his carefully modulated voice. "The first of its kind in the district. It would attract attention, funding, families from outside the neighborhood." Mrs. Patterson, the retired teacher who had taught Selene to read in room 12, raised her hand. "Mr. Ives, we haven't had a school counselor in 3 years." The room shifted. 3 years, she continued. "These children are dealing with trauma you can't imagine. Evictions, parents in prison, food insecurity, violence on their blocks. And you want to teach them to code?" Another voice from the back. Tablets break. Screens crack. Chargers disappear. "You know what doesn't break? A person who shows up every day and actually sees your kid." Corvan stood silent for a moment, his tablet suddenly feeling like a prop from a different play. "Counselor before coding lab," he said finally. "I hear you." His second proposal came 2 weeks later, a renovated gymnasium with professional-grade flooring, new basketball hoops, bleachers that could seat the whole neighborhood. Community events, he said, warming to the vision. Youth basketball leagues, health fairs, the kind of space that puts Lincoln on the map, ribbon-cutting worthy. Celine walked him to the second-floor bathroom. The toilet in the third stall had been broken for 18 months. A pipe behind the wall leaked steadily, creating a permanent puddle that maintenance addressed with a bucket and a handwritten caution sign. The smell of mildew hung thick in the air. "You can't run reading groups if kids are afraid to use the bathroom," she said flatly. "You want to know why attendance drops after lunch? Because children would rather hold it for hours than walk in here." Corvin stared at the bucket, at the stained ceiling tiles, at the mold creeping along the grout. "Plumbing before PR," he said quietly. He felt his ego bristle, the familiar resistance to being corrected, to having his grand visions reduced to leaking pipes and broken toilets. He was a billionaire. He had transformed neighborhoods. He had dined with senators and been profiled in magazines that called him a visionary. And here he was, being educated by a woman with paint on her sneakers about the importance of functional plumbing. He took a breath, made a choice. This is their home. "I am a guest. Show me what else is broken," he said. "All of it." The library table disappeared beneath spreadsheets and budget documents. Solène had spent weeks compiling the numbers, deferred maintenance costs, staffing gaps, program needs, the funding cliff that would arrive when current grants expired. The picture was brutal. Even if the school stayed open, it would slowly starve without sustained investment. Corvin studied the figures with the focus of a man who had built an empire on understanding numbers better than his competitors. "I could cover the gap," he said finally. 5 years of operational funding. My foundation writes the check, the school stays open, problem solved. Solène shook her head. "That's not a solution, that's a rescue. And rescues end. I'm offering to save. You're offering to own." Her voice remained calm but carried an edge that stopped his sentence mid-thought. "We don't need a patron who can yank the money away the moment he gets bored or finds a shinier project. We need something that belongs to us. Something you can't take back." The library fell silent. Somewhere in the building, a door closed. Footsteps echoed down a distant hallway. Corvin leaned back in his chair, studying the woman across from him, the exhaustion in her eyes, the determination in her jaw, the refusal to accept charity dressed up as partnership. "What would that look like?" he asked. "Something I can't take back." The conversation that followed stretched over 3 hours, then continued across 5 more meetings over the following weeks. What emerged was unlike anything Corvin had ever structured. A community land trust would own the building itself. Not the school district, not his corporation, but a non-profit controlled by the neighborhood. The land could never be sold to developers. The school could never be converted without community approval. His foundation would commit to a 10-year funding contract, legally binding, with accountability to a board composed primarily of residents, parents, and school staff. Not a gift that could be withdrawn. A contract with obligations and consequences. The district would retain academic oversight, curriculum, testing, teacher certification, but the community would have genuine authority over facilities, programs, after-school services. "My advisors think I'm insane," Corvin admitted during their final planning session. "They keep warning me about giving up control." Solène looked up from the legal documents spread between them. "And?" He smiled, small, uncertain, nothing like the polished confidence he had displayed on that gymnasium stage. "I think that's the point." The partnership developed in the spaces between meetings. Coffee from the cart on the corner, after late-night planning sessions, paper cups warming cold hands as they walked through streets that Corvin was only beginning to understand, shared jokes about plumbing days, and the expression on his face when he first saw the mold behind the bathroom walls. Quiet moments on the school's front steps, watching the row settle into evening rhythms. Respect came first, earned slowly, tested constantly, never assumed. But beneath the respect, something else began to grow. Solène noticed the way Corvin remembered names now, asking after Mr. Delaro's knee surgery and the Kowalski sisters' newest great-grandchild. Corvin noticed how Celine's shoulders relaxed slightly when he arrived on Saturday mornings, how her skepticism had softened into something approaching trust. Neither of them named it. Neither of them needed to. There was too much work to do for personal feelings to take center stage. A school to save, a neighborhood to protect, a future to build from the broken pieces of decades of neglect. But the connection was there, growing in the margins of their shared purpose. If more leaders actually listened like this, would our neighborhoods look different? Hit like if you think listening is underrated power, and subscribe if you want more stories where change doesn't come from magic but from messy, real work. But nothing was guaranteed. A plan on paper means nothing until someone votes yes or no. The Community Land Trust required approval from the school board, the city council, and a dozen regulatory bodies whose decisions could not be predicted or purchased. Corvin's lawyers had drafted the contracts. Celine's coalition had gathered the signatures. The neighborhood had organized, testified, and refused to disappear. And now everything they had built over months of work hung by a single decision. A vote scheduled for a Tuesday evening in the same gymnasium where a woman had laughed at a billionaire and changed everything. That night would determine whether Lincoln Elementary School lived or died, whether the row had a future or became another development opportunity on another investor's spreadsheet, whether any of it, the paint days, the plumbing repairs, the conversations, the trust, had mattered at all. The downtown auditorium held 400 seats, and every one of them was filled. Parents from the row had dressed in their best clothes, the kind reserved for church and job interviews and moments when being seen respectfully might matter. Teachers clutched note cards with trembling hands. Children fidgeted in seats too large for their small bodies, confused by the gravity that weighed down the adults around them. The school board sat elevated behind a curved wooden dais, 7 members whose votes would determine whether Lincoln Elementary lived or died. Celine sat in the 4th row, her hands pressed flat against her thighs to stop them from shaking. 3 rows behind her, Corvin had taken a seat near the aisle, watching the proceedings with an expression that revealed nothing. The board chair, Dr. Patricia Vance, called the meeting to order. The district's finance director presented first, charts showing enrollment decline, cost per pupil comparisons, phrases like strategic consolidation and resource optimization. The words washed over the audience like cold water. Then the community spoke. Lumi Santos, 10 years old in an oversized Lincoln Elementary t-shirt, gripped the podium with small hands. "My little brother is scared of the dark," she said. "If they close our school, we have to take the early bus. Diego would have to walk to the bus stop before the sun comes up, past the corner where the bad stuff happens." Her mother wept in the 3rd row. "Please don't make us leave our school. Please." The applause that followed was not triumphant but aching, adults recognizing truth in a child's plea. When Corvin's name was called, he walked to the podium carrying nothing. No slides, no notes. "A few months ago, I called this building an underutilized asset," he said. "A woman laughed at me. And she was right." He spoke about riding the bus, mopping floors, watching children learn to read. He credited Solane and the community as the architects of the plan before them. The simplest choice on a spreadsheet isn't always the kindest choice in real life. Tonight, you get to decide which one matters more. The vote came after a 15-minute recess. 4-3. The proposal had passed. The auditorium erupted. Cheers and sobs tangled together. Lumi threw her arms around Solane. Children jumped without understanding why. Corvin watched from the aisle. This was not his victory. It was theirs. For the first time in years, he was on the right side of someone else's story. 12 months had passed since the vote that saved Lincoln Elementary School. The hallways looked different now, not transformed into glossy renderings, but genuinely improved. Every fluorescent light worked. The 2nd-floor bathroom no longer smelled of mildew. New pipes ran behind walls that had been patched and painted. A door on the 1st floor bore a simple placard, Counselor's Office, Ms. Denise Williams. The community board met every 3rd Thursday in the library. Meeting notices hung on the front door in 3 languages. Parents debated line items with the intensity of people who understood that these numbers represented their children's futures. It was messy, contentious, exhausting. It was also real democracy. The end-of-year cookout filled Lincoln Elementary's back courtyard with smoke and laughter. Charcoal grills lined the fence. Folding tables bore mismatched dishes brought by families who had little to spare but shared anyway. Children chased each other across grass that had been brown and patchy a year ago, now green from the sprinkler system the Saturday crews had repaired. The neighborhood looked lived in, hopeful, not glamorous, but genuinely alive. Solène spotted Corvan approaching the courtyard gate with aluminum foil pans balanced in his arms. "You cooked?" she asked. "I bartered." He grinned. "Fixed a walk-in refrigerator last week. Lasagna seemed like fair trade." They found a quiet spot near the fence, watching children play basketball on the half-court Mr. Delaro had restored. "Do you ever think about it?" Corvan asked. "That night in the gymnasium. When you laughed?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "Mostly, I'm just glad I said anything at all." "I'm glad too. It cracked something open. Something that needed cracking." The sunset cast long shadows across the courtyard. "I care about this place," Corvan said quietly. "And I care about you. As a person, not a symbol." Solène studied his face. "If this is going to be anything, there are conditions. Keep listening. Keep showing up. No pedestals. Never let it derail the work." "I want the long-term agreement," he said, "with all the hard parts included." She nodded slowly. Not warmth exactly, but possibility. "Now come on. You're about to be late to the cobbler line." They walked toward the crowd together, shoulders occasionally brushing, conversation shifting to lighter things. It was not a fairy tale ending, just two people choosing the long, hard path instead of easy shortcuts. Sometimes, that is the most romantic thing of all. The headlines predictably got it wrong. Billionaire saves struggling school. Every story positioned Corvan as the hero. Every photograph showed him shaking hands with school board members. But that was not what happened. What happened was this: a community refused to disappear. For months before Corvan ever walked into that gymnasium, the row had been fighting, collecting signatures, attending meetings, repairing what they could with their own hands. And when Corvan did appear, polished and confident and utterly convinced of his own vision, something remarkable occurred. His willingness to be changed. A woman laughed at him in front of 300 people, and instead of retreating into offense, he chose curiosity. Instead of doubling down on his expertise, he picked up a paint roller. Instead of demanding gratitude, he asked how he could help. Real change came from showing up, not showing off. For those who feel powerless, sometimes all you have is your voice. Speaking up feels risky, but silence carries costs too. Solène chose to speak. She could not guarantee the outcome. She could only guarantee that her perspective would exist in the room. For those with power, when someone laughs at you or calls you out, you face a choice. Get defensive and walk away, or put down the microphone, pick up a paint roller, and listen. Humility is not weakness. Curiosity is not surrender. For communities facing forces larger than themselves, do not wait for a savior. The row did not sit quietly hoping for a benefactor. They organized. They designed the future they needed. When Corvan arrived with resources to offer, he found a community with a plan, demanding that anyone with money follow their lead. And about love, what grew between Solène and Corvan emerged from shared values and shared labor. From Saturday mornings painting walls, from difficult conversations about power and accountability. Lasting love grows from demonstrated character, not promised potential. Lincoln Elementary School still stands today. The mural in the main corridor has been repainted, not by professionals, but by students and parents working together. A new phrase scripted beneath the painted globe: "We fix it together." In the end, the loudest thing was not the billionaire's speech. It was the quiet, stubborn decision of ordinary people to keep showing up, until even a man used to flying above the clouds decided to come back down to earth and stand among them. That is the power that changes things.